at a pretty critical point, I think, in the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's been 1,000 days now.
It has.
And recent news and some analysis from experts suggests that we might be at a turning point.
A potential turning point.
Yeah, are we on the brink of a wider conflict?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what everybody wants to know.
Let's unpack what's happening and what it could mean.
Right. So where do you want to start? What's on your mind?
Well, let's start with the human cost of this war.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
The recent attack on Sumi.
Right.
It was devastating.
Right.
11 people dead, 89 injured.
Yeah.
Homes, schools, just everyday life shattered.
Yeah. It's easy to forget sometimes that this is not, an abstract geopolitical game. This is impacting real people in a very real way.
Yeah, it's not a chess game.
No.
And this attack comes amidst talk of sending ATACMS missiles to Ukraine.
Right.
These are long-range missiles capable of hitting targets within Russia itself.
Yeah, this is a capability that Ukraine hasn't had so far. And to understand why this is such a big deal, I think we need to remember that up until now, Western aid has focused on helping Ukraine defend itself within its own borders.
Right, so this is a potential escalation.
It is.
So what's driving this shift towards providing these longer-range weapons?
Well, I think from Ukraine's perspective, they see themselves as in a desperate fight for survival.
Sure.
They're arguing that these missiles are essential for pushing back against Russian forces and reclaiming their territory.
Mm-hmm.
And, you take a situation like we see in Kerch,
right,
where Ukrainian troops are facing encirclement.
Yeah, that's not a good situation.
No, it's a dire situation. And they see these missiles as a potential lifeline.
Right. We've also heard very strong warnings from Russia, though.
Of course.
With some officials even invoking the possibility of World War III.
Right. This is going to be World War III.
How seriously should we take those warnings?
I think it's always important to analyze these kinds of statements within the context of, Russian propaganda, which frequently uses this kind of alarming rhetoric to try to discourage Western support for Ukraine.
Right.
That said, any attack on Russian soil does carry the risk of unpredictable consequences.
Yeah.
So it's a complex situation where, understanding the nuances is crucial.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
So Putin has repeatedly framed this conflict as a battle against NATO expansion.
Of course.
A narrative that helps him rally domestic support at home.
Absolutely.
How might he use the potential introduction of ATACMS to further that narrative?
Well, he could very well seize upon this as proof of direct NATO involvement, even though these missiles, while provided by the U.S., would be operated by Ukraine.
Right.
And this could escalate tensions further, potentially leading to more aggressive actions from Russia.
And then it's a delicate situation with no easy answers.
As if things weren't already complicated enough.
We now have reports of North Korea entering the fray.
Yeah.
Sending thousands of troops to support Russia.
Right.
U.S. intelligence suggests we're talking about upwards of 10,000 soldiers deployed to the Kursk region near the Ukrainian border.
Wow.
This adds a whole new layer of complexity.
It does. The introduction of North Korean troops brings up a lot of questions.
Yeah.
What does North Korea gain from this? How does this impact the balance of power on the ground?
Right.
And perhaps most concerningly, how does it change the potential for escalation? This is a new development we need to watch very closely. North Korea's involvement is kind of a head-scratcher, isn't it?
It really is.
They're a notoriously isolated nation.
Right.
So seeing them actively insert themselves into this conflict, it raises eyebrows for sure.
Yeah, some analysts are suggesting that this is a sign of Russia's desperation, that they're having to rely on these less conventional allies because their own resources are stretched thin.
That's definitely a possibility, yeah. I mean, it also suggests that Russia is willing to forge deeper ties with countries that are openly opposed to the West.
Right.
Even if those countries, have a questionable human rights record, shall we say.
Yeah, you mentioned a questionable human rights record.
Right.
We can't forget that North Korea is a totalitarian regime with a very long history of human rights abuses.
Right.
So what does this alliance say about Russia's own values and its willingness to partner with a regime like this?
It definitely sends a chilling message, I think.
Yeah.
And it raises questions about, what is North Korea getting out of this arrangement?
Right.
Is it purely ideological alignment, or are there more tangible benefits?
Right.
Some people are speculating that they might be seeking financial incentives or access to advanced weaponry, or even support for their own nuclear program.
So we've got this backdrop of these escalating tensions, these new players entering the field, and a lot of unknowns.
A lot of unknowns.
Let's zoom in on the debate surrounding those ATACMS missiles. What are the arguments for and against providing Ukraine with this really game-changing capability?
Well, I think it's important to remember that there are valid points to be made on both sides of this issue.
Of course.
Those in favor of sending the ATACMS argue that Ukraine has the right to defend itself by any means necessary.
Right.
They believe that these missiles could be a turning point, enabling Ukraine to strike Russian supply lines and command centers, potentially shortening the war and ultimately saving lives in the long run.
But there's also a very real concern that providing these longer-range missiles could be seen as a major provocation by Russia.
Yeah.
And it pushes us closer to a wider conflict.
It's possible.
So what are the specific risks associated with this decision?
Well, critics would argue that supplying ATACMS crosses a red line for Russia. They fear that it could be perceived as a direct NATO attack, leading to unpredictable and potentially catastrophic retaliation.
Yeah.
This could include strikes against NATO countries or even the use of tactical nuclear weapons.
That is a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the incredible weight of this decision.
Absolutely.
On the one hand, you don't want to abandon Ukraine in a time of need.
Right.
But on the other hand, you want to avoid any actions that could escalate this conflict and potentially have these really devastating global consequences.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And this is where the importance of diplomacy comes in, I think. You know, military aid is crucial, but ultimately, a lasting solution has to come from finding a way to negotiate a peaceful end to the conflict.
Right.
And that means keeping those channels of communication open, even in the midst of all these heightened tensions.
So even as we're talking about these advanced weapons and the potential for escalation, we can't lose sight of the need for a diplomatic solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The stakes are incredibly high right now, but diplomacy has to remain a priority. It's the only way to prevent this conflict from spiraling even further out of control.
Right.
And potentially engulfing the entire world.
This deep dive has certainly painted a very sobering picture of the situation.
It has.
A war that began with Russia's invasion of Ukraine has now drawn in other actors and raised the possibilities of conflict that could extend far beyond Ukraine's borders.
It's true. And at times like these, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all.
It is.
The complexity of it all, the, potential for disaster, it can be paralyzing.
Yeah.
But it's precisely in moments like these that I think we need to stay informed and engaged.
Yeah, it can be easy to feel helpless when faced with a conflict of this magnitude.
It's true.
But I think understanding the complexities, the different perspectives, the potential consequences, that's where we can kind of find our agency.
Knowledge is power.
Right.
The more we understand about the forces at play, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
Right.
Advocate for the kind of world that we want to live in.
So this deep dive has hopefully given everyone listening a much clearer picture of where things stand.
I hope so.
But of course it doesn't end here.
No, of course not. This is a constantly evolving situation.
Yeah. So what can our listener do with this information?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. How can they make sense of it all and maybe even find a little glimmer of hope amidst all this uncertainty?
Well, I think it's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the alarming rhetoric, the sense of impending doom.
Right.
But we have to remember that history is not predetermined. There's always room for human agency, collective action, pushing back against that tide of negativity.
So instead of giving into that fear and despair, we should be channeling our energy into staying informed.
Absolutely.
Engaging in thoughtful discussion.
Yeah.
And really demanding that our leaders prioritize diplomatic solutions.
Couldn't agree more.
Right.
We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We have to be active participants in shaping the future.
Yeah. And that can take many forms, right?
It can.
Whether it's through supporting humanitarian efforts, contacting our elected officials,
or
even just having these really honest and open conversations with our friends and family about this.
Absolutely. Every action, no matter how small it may seem, can contribute to a more peaceful and just world.
We started this deep dive by talking about a potential turning point, and I don't think that was an exaggeration.
Yeah.
The decisions that are being made right now, the actions being taken, are going to have a ripple effect that will extend far beyond this immediate conflict.
It's a sobering thought, but I think it's also a reminder of our collective power. We're not just passive observers, in this unfolding drama.
Right.
We have a voice, and we need to use it.
This has been a heavy conversation.
It has.
But I think it's important to end on a note of hope.
I agree.
The human spirit is incredibly resilient. Throughout history, we've faced countless challenges, seemingly insurmountable odds, and yet we find a way to persevere, to rebuild, to move forward.
We do.
That's the spirit we need to tap into right now.
Absolutely.
It's not about ignoring the gravity of the situation.
Right.
But it's about refusing to succumb to that despair.
Yeah, remembering that even in the darkest of times, there's always that flicker of hope, a possibility for a better future.
Yeah.
And that possibility is something that we have to actively create.
So we'll leave you with this. What are your thoughts on this situation? What gives you hope in the face of these challenges? Share your reflections in the comments, and let's continue this conversation together.
I think that's a great idea.
Thank you for joining us on this critical deep dive.
It's been a pleasure and check.